Today we're going to talk about the Porsche 928. This is my personal vehicle, and it happens to be a Series 1, which is the 928 that were produced between 1978 and 79, effectively the first 2 years of its production. What makes this entire range somewhat unique are a number of factors which I'm going to try and cover quite quickly. And then we're going to touch on this specific vehicle, and then perhaps cover some of the more contentious issues around what it's appreciated for and how it lines up against the likes of the 911. So firstly, the range as a whole. The 928 was, in fact, the design of the 928 started and commenced in the very end of 1971. And I think if you understand or appreciate what was happening coming into the 70s in terms of automotive design, this is a vehicle that is very much of its day. If you have a look at the probably what was the most exciting decade of automotive design, the 70s, what was coming out of the Italian marques, what the likes of Bertoni were doing, for the likes of Ferrari, Alfa Lancia, the German Porsche brand was faced with a few interesting commercial challenges which it had to solve. And out of that came what ultimately was, and still remains, one of its most ambitious design projects ever. So just to put this into context, they have never, as an organization, spent as much on the design and development of a vehicle as a percentage of total company income as what they did for the 928. This is a vehicle that was, by all measures, an incredibly ambitious project. Everything on this vehicle was designed from the ground up. Nothing other than perhaps a side view mirror at most, and one or two other small components, was pulled through from previous 911 models. The 911 itself, which a lot of people don't realize, was in fact not particularly innovative and was in fact more of a kind of evolution of the 356. And the 356 in itself was not in fact that innovative in its own right, given what it is that Porsche was doing with a range of other brands in terms of design principles and so on. The 928 was certainly 100% new for a number of reasons. The world wanted something else. The 70s was a kind of a decade of experimentation, and they climbed in feet first and produced what is, in my opinion, one of the most remarkable model ranges to have ever left Porsche. Let's talk about some of those key principles, what it is that went into the car. The obvious one, of course, is, yes, we're talking about a motor in the front. This one happens to be a 4.5 litre motor. Yes, it sits up front. What a lot of people don't know is this is a transaxle design, meaning that the transaxle refers to the fact that the transmission or the gearbox sits at the rear of the car. And what this leads to is a weight or a balance optimization that one feels very much when you drive the car. A lot of that thinking comes out of Porsche's very successful racing kind of learnings out of the late 60s and obviously into the early 70s, which they applied to this car. Another important component of this car is what they call the Weissach axle. The Weissach axle is, which obviously you can't see from this angle, was in fact an incredibly innovative design at the time, which effectively stopped upon cornering, but entering and exiting under power, any form of tuck-in. So you had a car that mechanically had thinking axles. So not electronically, as we're familiar with today, where a CPU takes over and drives a car to some extent for you. This was a mechanical engineering feat with what was effectively intelligent axles, now known as the Weissach axles. So fundamentally, those were the key, kind of changes to the car in terms of its previous lineup. The other important innovation is, yes, it's a 2+2. So we're talking about, seats in the rear, not just baby bucket seats, but in fact full seats in the rear. A 2+2, a true kind of family cruiser, if you will. We'll talk about the interior in a second. But as a whole, this was a car that wasn't, rooted in nostalgia. This is a car that was firmly kind of planted in the future. And whilst the future may now seem somewhat dated, I think it's important to be able to look back and understand what it is that was happening in the late 70s. Well, so the late 60s and the early 70s. Let's talk about this car specifically. This is a car which I took roughly 2 years to find. not an easy vehicle to find. There are a bunch of 928s out there in the market. I specifically wanted a first series or a series 1 before any form of adornment hit the car. So you might notice that there is no side view mirror, effectively the passenger mirror. There is absolutely no trim down the side of the vehicle. There are no spoilers at the front. They tend to spoil the car. No fins and things at the back. I think what happened was, over the course of time, many of those accoutrements were added to the 928. It also got a larger displacement, 4.5, up to 4.7, etc., right up to the GT. Some very powerful motors at the end. I just wanted something that was absolutely pure and simple, which is what the Series 1 ultimately represents. Much like the 911s, the early 911s to me are really pretty for what they are, because they represent what the design objective was at the time. That's very much the same for the 928. So this is a Series 1. What's also important about this car, and this is where things start getting contentious, it is an automatic. Yes, that's a 3-speed auto. Which, interestingly enough, is in fact the rarer of the model. Porsche had its own manual gearbox when this car was designed. They in fact used or commissioned Mercedes-Benz, who built this 3-speed box for them. And in fact, it's a far rarer example of the early cars. A lot more manuals were built. Now, a lot of people will say Porsche needs to be a manual car, and I would absolutely agree with that sentiment with regards to the entire 911 range. Not only are they, in my opinion, better driving as manual, the 911s, they also retain their value, as a lot of people would attest to. But the 928, and this is where it starts to get contentious, in my opinion, is in fact highly suited to being an automatic. Now, for that, well, let's put it in let's call it a slightly more humorous sense. This car was designed for absolute and utter luxury. This was one of the most expensive cars available at the time, priced at the levels of Ferraris at the time. Everything in this car is electronic, or electric at least. You can dip and raise the headlights. You can change the balance of the speakers. There is even an electric means to be able to reset the odometer or the trip meter. You don't have to kind of sit there and twiddle the knob yourself. Obviously the lights, which everybody knows, pop up and down on the 928 are frankly amazing. But everything on this car, electronic. And now we're talking about a car that was developed from 71, ultimately hit the showroom floor in 78. This car even happens to have speed control. So this is a car that was built for luxury. Electric seats, backwards and forwards, all of the accoutrements. So it was designed as a cruiser. What that means is not trying to race from point to point. This car's got very long legs. On the highway at speed, I still find it to be the most comfortable car that I own, and that stretches across a number of 911s all the way up to the 991. At speed, this car feels more comfortable for me than any other that I've ever driven. It is truly a cruiser. So a cruiser built for luxury to me is much like, I don't know, flying business class or first class, if you will. And, you know, I mean, if you have the option to sit in business class, you might as well take, you know, let's call it advantage of all the benefits that you get with that. You know, so to me, a car that was designed to cruise, have long legs, and by the way, it's not as though it's slow, but it simply isn't designed to kind of shoot around a track necessarily, but rather to take long cruise trips. If you want to take full advantage of that, my advice is to let the car change gear for you. You know, much like in business class, if you want to fly coach, you know, you're welcome to hop up in the middle of the night and go and grab your own drinks from the galley. But if you're going to fly business class, you know, there are very capable cabin crew that'll bring you the drink that you appreciate the journey. So, perhaps contentious, but I believe that the manual for a 928, whilst it tends to command a higher premium, I think is somewhat misguided. The best cars aren't necessarily purely manual, specifically not the cruisers. So, whilst we're in the interior of this car, another thing that makes this car absolutely, obviously quite collectible and rare is the fact that it has a Porsche interior. Take a look at that. The seat automatically moves forward to let your loved ones into the rear. This car, in fact, happens to have its original Porsche interior. Now, when I say original, I mean back to 1978, unchanged. When I sought this car out, it took me 2 years to find the right car. And upon the advice from a very good friend of mine, I bought my 928 based on the caliber of its interior. You cannot replace the interior of these cars. Look, rebuilding 928s as a whole is challenging, but you most certainly cannot replace the interior. And even new Porsche fabric, which is available, just does not carry the same kind of feel to the car. So I took 2 years to find a Series 1 that still had its original Porsche, which is what it is that I wanted. I went to a lot of efforts to keep it as is, and with the kind of the interior pretty much firmly in place. To me, it becomes a very special car. Another very interesting thing about this car, since we're in the interior, some of the quirks that it has sun visors for the rear. So we're talking about the ability for your passengers to get the benefit of a sun visor, which I feel is just one of those amazing quirks coming out of Porsche at the time. They literally spared no expense whatsoever to make this vehicle what it is. And that, frankly, is one of the most exciting vehicles of its day. Let's talk about, well, in this case specifically, this vehicle. I want to talk about the trim before we talk about the motor. So it's quite unusual to see a 928 with what we would call bright trim. The reality is that this trim used to be black. So back in, over the years, what's happened is the sun has simply made this trim fade. And upon the restoration, which was a fairly ambitious restoration, I took the decision, in fact, not to replace the trim or re-anodize it. And what you can't see here particularly easily because of the shadow effect is that is still dark trim, because that's where the sun doesn't hit. Whereas over there, it's bright. There's some really beautiful details about a vehicle, which I really do appreciate. You can also see here, for example, where upon refitting some of the rubbers, that's where the sun itself doesn't fade the aluminium. So this car has got its original aluminium trim, and the anodizing has worn off, which is quite remarkable. Yes, there's its pretty cousin, or sister, older sister as it were. Let's have a look inside. 4.5 litre motor. This one has been fully rebuilt, so she is certainly very tidy. All of the original decaling. I prefer a decal that's, if it's original and legible, I'd rather keep it than replace it with a cheap new one. So everything on this car is 100% the way that she came out of the factory. Obviously, we took absolutely everything on this car apart, rebuilt it. When I say that I certainly didn't do it. A very talented individual called Rob Scott managed the rebuild of this car. There's a very interesting story about how it is that this car was in fact entered into the local Porsche club's annual concourse. We took roughly, it would have been around 6 months to strip and rebuild this car, and ultimately it was finished by having worked overnight and driven for the very first time, having been fully stripped to the local concourse. Not a single bit of trouble whatsoever, and the car in fact won in its class. Okay, so now with some of the background out of the way, let's talk about another fairly interesting issue, which is why it is that I like the 928 so much. Well, the first thing is, well, I guess for one, I kind of can split this into two. Firstly, the car itself to me is wonderful for all the reasons that I've started to kind of touch on. It was an ambitious design project. It was something which Porsche pulled off particularly well. And it's just a really, really unique vehicle. It's somewhat of a cult classic in my view, and I quite like the fact that so few people in fact have them and enjoy them. So that's not me enjoying the car per se, but there's another reason that I like the 928, and that is I like the people that like the 928. I happen to be part of one or two WhatsApp groups on the 928 community. I don't do it for the 911 community. I find that the 911 WhatsApp communities are filled with vitriol. And I don't know, well, I have a few theories as to why, but what I'd rather talk about is the positive reasons as to why I enjoy being part of the 928 community. We're talking about individuals that are truly passionate about their vehicles. And if we talk about the individuals who love the 928, to me they split roughly into two groups. The absolute passionistas, and we'll talk about them first, and then the design, let's call them appreciators. And they aren't all necessarily strictly separate. But the passionate owners of 928s, and hence back to this WhatsApp group, are people that take these cars apart. They are not simple to take apart. They are not easy to work on. These are guys that take them apart, they modify them, they beef them up, or they keep them original. But they truly are passionate individuals. On the groups, they only have positive things to say. They share information willingly. They really are good folk. You come in and run into a problem, they will help you. You post a picture of your vehicle, they will approve, or they'll give you feedback. But it's always in some way constructive and positive. And to me, it speaks volumes about people who it is that are confident in their choice of vehicle. They're just confident individuals. They're nicer individuals. And why is it that they're so confident? Well, they love the car for their own reason. They don't have to try and impress somebody about why it is that they love a car. Anyway, they make for a good bunch of people, and I'm attracted to people of that nature. And that was one of the reasons that I really enjoyed the 928. The other reason is that there's a very strong following of this car in the design community. So now we're talking about people who appreciate design for design's sake. And design, we must understand, is not just aesthetic. Design is a number of things. Design, as they say, is a good idea, but design is what something looks like. Design is how something works. Design is a system. Design is kind of a view to the future of making things better. And there is a very, very discerning number of individuals out there that love the 928 purely for that reason. And I do, to a great extent, kind of resonate with those individuals. And this car is an absolute design feat. It is a car that represents an organization's ambition to change, and not just for the sake of it, but to change for the better, and kind of answer a market's needs and produce something that they'd never ever produced before. They kind of fought their way through the Gulf crisis, fought their way through a number of, let's call them individuals, wanting to kind of hark back to the past with Peter the 911. And whilst the 911 carried on and became a huge success and carries on doing so, and obviously everybody's aware of the fact that I'm a massive proponent of the 911, one must not forget that the 928 pretty much cast the foundation for a number of the models that Porsche has since produced, which, let's be honest, make it the significant slice of money, which are its 2+2s, the Cayennes, the Macans, etc. So, in short, whilst this is obviously a car which is somewhat remarkable in terms of its condition, I have a lot of respect for anybody out there that drives, maintains, and loves their 928. Please keep on kind of doing what you do. Keep on being the way that you are online. Keep differentiating yourselves from the 911 group. You're the kind of individuals who I think we need more of. And in my opinion, the 928 is best kind of put this way, which is, to me, it's a celebration of instead of whereas the 911 is a celebration of nostalgia and the past, the 928 is simply a celebration of the future. So we're looking here is a car that pretty much celebrates the future, but it's a time capsule back to the mid-70s. And that to me is something quite special. Anyway, thank you for listening, and we'll see each other soon.